Well, good morning. Now, in yesterday's class, we had started to talk about the emotional intelligence. So, there we had seen that what exactly emotional intelligence is, what are the types of emotional intelligence, what are the subtypes. We had also seen that how important role does emotional intelligence play in our life, personal, professional, or organizational life of an organization, and also the GDP of the nation. And towards the end of the class yesterday, we had started to talk about you can see the meaning of emotion. So let's continue with that. We had done some of that, rest of that we will talk about today. So we had seen that the way we define emotions have the following characteristics. First of all, they are brief in duration. We had seen the meaning of that. Second thing was that they are always triggered by some triggering event, which means essentially that every emotion has a cause. Emotions do not occur in vacuum. It has a cause. It has a triggering event always, so something happens around us or in our mind and that triggers an emotion in us. That is what we had talked about second. Excuse me. Third, we had seen that emotions always evaluate their triggering event and through that it indicates their significance. It indicates how significant these can say emotions are for us. So, for example, we had seen that some primary emotions, if you look at it, we have talked about these primary emotions in detail yesterday, that for example, happiness indicates to us that something is good around us, which is beneficial for our survival, which is conducive to our well-being and flourishing. Second was sadness, which indicates to us about a loss of something. It allows us to force us to reflect about that loss. It allows us to adjust to that loss, and it also bring people closer to each other if it is shared with others. Third was fear, which tells us that there is some threat around us, some danger around us, which we should be careful of. Fourth was anger, which tells us there is something wrong has happened to us, something wrong, something frustrating, something unjustified. There is some obstacle in the achievement of our justified goal that makes us angry. Fifth emotion that we had talked about was disgust, which means that there is something bad in taste or mouth, a taste or a smell, which might be poisonous for our biological survival, biological well-being, biological flourishing and all. And last one we have talked about, that was surprise, which tells us that is something new has happened around us, something unexpected has happened around us, and it also motivates us to pay attention to the new thing rather than the old thing that we were talking about earlier, we were attending to earlier. So, according to people like Paul Ekman, for example, there are 6 primary emotions that every person has, and it is the meaning of that emotion, it is the implication of that emotion. This is how emotions tell us that how significant the triggering event is. Whether the triggering event is it good, happiness, something lost, sadness, something threatening, fear, something wrong, anger, something bad in taste, poisonous, disgust, something new and unexpected, surprise. So anything that happens around us, depending on what is the importance of that for us, well, these various emotions are generated in us and we have to understand what exactly these emotions mean to us. So that is what we had talked about yesterday. And because of that, we had seen yesterday that emotions have a very strong survival, very strong, important survival value. So till this point we had talked about in yesterday's class. Now before we go to the next one, let me take I think there is a question just now. If possible, we'll take that. Good morning, good morning. How emotional intelligence becomes a key leadership skill, Madan? Well, we'll talk about that in later class. I told you leadership is a part of emotions. Mandeep, long question. If the principle of golden mean is relative to a person and ethics is universal, how do we justify the former study as legitimate? Well, as I told you that these all theories talk about one aspect of ethics. So Aristotle will say that golden mean is virtue, but libertarian will say that no, there is nothing called predetermined virtue. Virtue must be decided by. I hope that you have studied yesterday in the beginning of the class when we are talking about the criticism of virtue theory. So golden mean was Aristotle's idea. In ethics, no idea is always applicable. Each theory is important in some manner, and each theory has some negativity also in that case. So a study is legitimate, but I can say it is not universal. That's why don't use the term illegitimate. All study is legitimate, but none of them is universal. That is the basic thing. Second thing, Durkheim said that the classes are functional to the society, but Aristotle says that the virtue is the only good. So if there isn't any bad, how will there be any justification of the good? I did not, who said that there is nothing bad? Durkheim is not Aristotle. Durkheim was another person, Aristotle was another person. Why do you use the Durkheim to justify Aristotle? Isn't it? So that is that is a very unjustified thing. You are using the, you can say, apple to, you are comparing apple with the, you can say, orange. So don't use Durkheim to justify Aristotle. Talk about Aristotle's theory separately, and if you have to study Durkheim, the Durkheim is separate. So Durkheim said that it is functional. So conflict is functional, but does not mean that it is a, can say, maybe there also something bad can be there. So conflict has a function, maybe lack of conflict may be dysfunctional then. So don't compare the apple with the orange, that will confuse you. Don't bring everything together. So Aristotle's theory studies separately, yes, virtue is there and vice is there. And even if you take the Durkheim's idea, then well, if conflict is functional, then no conflict will also become dysfunctional, that might become bad then. So don't go into that direction, that will become very complicated. A right decision is made by a virtuous person. A virtuous person possesses virtue. Virtues are what allows one to make a right decision. Please explain the circular definition. Yes, this is one of the, you can say, controversy, one of the criticism of virtue theory. That virtue theory often becomes circular. That Aristotle himself was confused in that case, maybe, that he said that what is virtue, what virtuous people do. And so, who are virtuous people? Who do the virtue. So that is where the problem. In India, the virtue theory everywhere had this confusion. In India also, you can say, in the traditional virtue ethics, we often say that there was a saying, there is a Sanskrit saying, wise person, wherever wise person go is the path. Viprajan gatoso pantha, viprajan gatoso pantha, something like this one. So where the wise people go, that is the path. Who are wise people? Who go on that path. What is the right path? Where the wise people go. So everywhere virtue theory has some circularity in the argument. So that is a criticism that I did not discuss in my class, that will become too philosophical. But since you ask, yes, it is a criticism. Virtue argument often becomes circular. So that is next one. If man is a political animal, how are the reasonable restrictions? A convinced felon cannot contest elections for politics justified by this theory. Man is a political element does not mean that you have to fight election only. Politics is not about, I think you should not be asking this question after all the class that we did yesterday. Politics is not about only fighting election. Politics is, so even a felon or a criminal, for example, can actually express their political opinion. That is politics. I am not fighting election. Does it mean that I don't do the politics? You are not fighting election. Does it mean that you should not do the politics? Why are you equating politics with the election only? Isn't it? So think before you can say political animal does not mean that you have to contest elections. Next one, if the state must actively ensure that there is more virtue and people keep away from the vice, who would protect us from the unethical behavior of the state? I already talked about that in yesterday's class. Why are you asking this question? Is it this question after the yesterday's class or before that? I already told you that this is the criticism of the libertarian theory, that they say that how can a state be imposing virtue upon us? So, what we discussed in the classroom, why are you asking that question? Unethical behavior of the state. Next one, Thomas Aquinas said that man has a natural appetite for virtue, but the perfection of virtue must be acquired by the man by means of some kind of training. Please explain this statement and how to solve such kind of questions. Again, we have discussed already yesterday that virtue can be trained only by practice. So this is where the role of practice comes up. We have talked about that again in so much detail in yesterday's class, like driving, like cooking, etc. So virtue is a natural thing. Sachin Tendulkar has a, you can say, telos, but for that he has to train himself. Then only he can acquire the virtue. Lata Mangeshkar has the virtue, you can say, that telos to become a singer, but she has to train for that. Farhan Qureshi has the telos of becoming a photographer, but he has to train for that. We have already talked about that in yesterday's class. So all the question that you have asked is something that we had already talked about yesterday class. You are repeating the things. You are asking me to repeat the class once again, virtually. Next question, Subrata. Sir, as IQ plays an important role to get a higher level job, so can we say that before entering UPSC, we should have measured our IQ level? No, not necessarily. You don't have to measure your IQ, you have some idea of your IQ. In fact, your decision, if you have made some, can say, the calculated judgment that should you prepare for the UPSC exam or not, then IQ may be already there. IQ is not a big problem. For majority of the people, you have standard IQ. Don't worry about IQ. Study whatever we are discussing in our class only as a theoretical thing. Mostly. Don't try to, can say, be too concerned about the ideas here, because these ideas, IQ, if you look at it, IQ is a very complicated concept. So think about, there are thick books written on IQ. We have just discussed in 1 hour, maybe less than 1 hour. So what we have discussed is very superficial knowledge. That is what is required for general studies. We are doing general studies only. You are not doing the research in IQ. So don't try to implement that on your personal life, maybe. Study that as an academic topic. Our purpose in this classroom is only to help you to equip to write a good answer when there is a question. Understand the concept only, prepare yourself for writing answer and write a good answer. That is it. Don't overstep your jurisdiction. That will simply confuse you. That will simply conflate your, you can say, preparation maybe. So this is the concept of our IQ. That is what we have found in our research, and that is how we can write your answer. That is it. Don't try to apply these things on you all the time. Indeed, you can use somehow that, but again, as I told you, that if you have made some calculated move to prepare for the UPSC exam, then the chance is high that your IQ would definitely be high. So normally it is seen that people who actually clear the college and you can say university, etc., their IQ is on. If the IQ had been very low for you, then you might have not been a graduate also. Those people become dropouts normally. So they don't have that motivation to study maybe. So don't make a judgment about yourself on the basis of what we study in the classroom. Not here, not in the future also. Well, come back to this thing. That was the third thing. And then after we'll talk about the last important thing that we have to talk about emotions. Fourth one. Now write down. They involve synchronized responses between, they involve the synchronized responses between, number one, facial expressions, number two, physiological changes, and number three, their subjective evaluation. They involve the synchronized responses between the facial expressions, physiological changes, and their subjective evaluation. So now finally we will talk about one more thing about emotion, that emotions always have the three important, you can say, changes inside us. First of all, that whenever emotions happen inside us, occur inside us, then first change that happens on our body outside is the change in the facial expression. So every emotion brings about a change in the face, on our face. In happiness, for example, we smile or laugh. In sadness, we cry. In anger, we frown. So every emotion, even some small weak emotion, for example, whenever we have some emotion, then some change on the facial muscle always take place. Sometimes change on the lips or chin or cheek or nose or forehead and eye and eyebrow. Sometimes color of the face. In some emotion, we become red in anger, for example, blush. That also changes the color of the cheeks. So that sometimes color changes, sometimes you can say appearance changes, sometimes some twitching happens, sometimes some movement in the face happens. So some change on the facial muscles always happen when we experience some emotion, when we feel emotions. And this change that happens on our face during the emotions can be observed by the other people. Because of that, as you will see in a later class, that this plays a very important role in our empathy. So that is what facial expression means. Secondly, you can say that every emotion brings about certain physiological changes inside us, some biological changes inside us. What are these physiological changes? Some of the most common changes are change in your heartbeat, change in the heartbeat. You know that whenever emotions happen, then emotions always, first thing that we feel in our body in the change in heartbeat. Because you know, a normal human heart beats, as of all of you know, that a normal human heart beats at the rate of 72 per minute. But whenever we feel an emotion, then our heart, this rate of heartbeat often changes. Either it becomes more than 72 or less than 72, whatever may be your standard. Each one of us have our own standard heart rate. So, but whenever we feel an emotion, that some change in the heartbeat always happen, and this is perhaps the first thing that we observe in our body. So consistent this is that throughout history, that philosophers and the people in general, well, they have all tried to associate emotions with the heart. As such a great philosopher like Aristotle, for example, he also said that he said that region occurs in the brain and emotions occur in the heart. But as we'll see in the next topic in our class today, that emotions has nothing to do with the heart. Emotions also occur in the brain. Heart is just a pumping machine. But the rate at which it pumps the blood inside us, well, that indicates to us that we are feeling some emotion. So that is why. So that's why people often think. So it is the first thing that we observe in our body when how fast our heart is beating. Because of that, many people often associate emotions with the heart. So when people talk about emotion, they often talk about heart, dil ki baat, something rather than dimag ki baat. So emotions are always often found to be so. People often think emotions are associated with the heart or the dil. But in reality, emotion had directly nothing to do with the heart. It is just a sort of, today we use that just as a, you can say, a matter of speech, maybe just as a metaphor, maybe. Reality, heart has nothing to do with it. It is just a indication. So it is something like, you can say, a odometer of a car that tells you how much fuel is there in the, you can say, tank. So heartbeat only tells us that which emotion is there inside us. So it is indication of emotion rather than the origin of emotion. So that is what you can say. So even poems also, poets also, singers also, songwriters, etc. also, they have all associated emotions with the heart. This is the first thing most consistently we observe in our body when we feel some emotion. First one. Then after, other changes also happen, like change in the blood sugar, for example, blood pressure, for example, BP or blood sugar. Emotions always change in the bring about a change in our blood sugar, or say blood pressure, dilation of the pupil of the eye. So in emotions, our eyes often become changed somehow, always. Look at the eye of a person and you can actually know that this person is undergoing an emotional change. So the eyes are very clear indication of the emotions, so clear that people often say that eyes are the window to the soul. Soul is what? Soul is the emotional, you can say, interior of us, ourselves. So that is what we can say, dilation of the pupil of the eye, or you can say change in the temperature. In some emotion we become hot, in some emotion we become cold. So in anger we often become hot, गुस्से में गर्म हो जाना. So in anger we become hot, in fear also we become hot, in sadness we become a little cold. So it changes the temperature of our body also, or you can say consequent on that, well, we can have some perspiration. We can have some perspiration. So that in some emotion we start perspiring also, sweating also, palpitating also. So palpitation may change, you can say is related to heartbeat, or change in the GSR, for example, galvanic skin resistance. So our skin has an electrical resistance, and when we feel some emotion, then electrical resistance of our skin often changes, which can easily be measured by a small galvanometer being by putting a electrode between our fingers, for example. So that we call galvanic skin resistance. So there are large number of other changes also happen that, well, emotions bring about inside us. So emotions always bring about some change in our internal organs, internal biology, internal physiology. So now next important question is that what is the purpose of these changes? Why is it that these changes normally happen? The purpose of these changes is that by bringing about these changes, emotions allow us to reallocate our energy for a more important purpose which it thinks is present right now. So in this sense, we can see that emotions often take energy from our body, energy from a less important work, and passes that on to the more important work to handle the triggering event that has created the emotion. Suppose, for example, just think of it. So think of it, for example, that suppose there is a person who is on a hunger strike, or can say sitting on a fast for last 8, 9, 10 days, he has not eaten anything, Anna Hazare types. Now suppose this person is very weak, so weak this person is that he is lying on a bed again like a dead person. He is not able to stand also, he is so weak, he is not able to walk, he is not able to stand, he is not able to sit also, he is not able to talk also, he is not able to raise his hand also, just lying on a bed like a virtually dead person in coma maybe. Now suddenly to that person, suddenly you tell him that there is a snake on your bed. Do you know what will happen? Well, within seconds, this person will jump out of the bed and start running maybe. Now, the same person who was not able to sit and stand also a moment earlier, now is jumping and running. From where that energy has come? That energy has come from the emotion of fear. Fear energizes us. Fear makes your legs more powerful. In fear, our legs become, each emotion, well, divert energy to a different, you can say, organs of our body. In fear, our legs become more powerful because in fear, we have to run away from the threatening object. In anger, our hands become more powerful because we have to, well, fight the other person to correct the wrong. So in each of us, can you tell me, for example, which part of our body becomes more sensitive and active when we are surprised? I hope some of you may have answered that question already. Eyes. So in surprise, our eyes become wide open. Why so? Because in surprise, something new has happened and you must attend to that. You must know that new things properly. And in order to know that properly, our eyes become wide open so that more information can come, more light can come inside the eye and we can understand the object in a more, well, accurate manner. Not only eyes, in surprise, all our sense organs become more sensitive. Our ears also become sensitive, our nose and tongue, even our skin becomes more sensitive when we are surprised. So that we can take the information about the nature, new change, well, and well, be ready to respond appropriately after that. So in every emotion, you know that some change in energy level of our body happens. In a way, you can see that by doing this, emotion changes our energy availability. So it does not only tell you that something threatening or something important has happened around us. Emotion also provide you energy how to handle that thing, so that we can respond to that appropriately with enough energy in a way. So is it energy managed? So I can define emotion in a another language. Emotion is an internal management system of energy. How the energy has to be regulated inside us, how the energy has to be managed inside us, in us in a way. It is an internal management system of energy. Suppose, for example, you have eaten something and you are spending lots of energy in the digestion of your breakfast. Suddenly there is a lion in front of you. Now in this case, if you continue your digestion of your breakfast, then you might possibly become breakfast of that lion. So in order not to become breakfast of the lion, you must suspend your digestion of your breakfast. Take that energy out of your stomach, for example, and pass that onto your legs so that you can run faster. And if you run faster, you will be saved. Digestion can wait for that. So in emotions, what it does, that it takes the energy from the immediately less important work that can wait, like digestion, to more important work, more important organs of your body, like legs and hands, through which you have to respond to the threatening object that has happened around us. That is what emotions do for us. Now, if you look at these changes, then these are the changes that is often used in the polygraph, in the lie detectors in general. Now, lie detector, how do they detect the lie? Think of it. Now, when we lie, then can you tell me which emotion normally we may feel? Well, perhaps all of you know the answer. When we lie, then we often feel fear. We are always afraid while lying that somebody can detect our lie, somebody can know our lie. So what they do in the lie detector, they monitor all these things. And then after they ask you some normal question like what's your name, your qualification, your father's name, your place of birth, your caste, your religion, etc., in which normally we don't lie. So they keep on asking, you keep on speaking truth all the time, and they will monitor your standard response on these things, and suddenly they will ask critical question. And if you lie in that question, then there will be a sudden change in all of that. And if there is sudden change in all of that, then they will know that perhaps you are lying in that case. So there are some people, though they can control all of these things. They can lie very effectively. They can cheat the lie detectors also. They are the consummate liars, we call them. But for normal people like us, for example, it is next to impossible for us to cheat a lie detector, because we cannot control all of them at the same time. Some change will automatically happen inside our body when we lie. So this is what you can say decided. This is the meaning of that physiological changes that I was talking about. So emotions always bring about some physiological changes inside us, number 2. And number 3, subjective evaluation of that change. That if some change is happening around us, then while evaluating the external environment, we try to assign a meaning to that change. What is the meaning of that change? And according to that meaning, we feel various emotion, because sometimes it may happen that you can say same physiological change may happen in two different emotions also. In happiness also our heartbeat increases, in anger also our heartbeat increases, but we perceive anger differently than happiness. This is where a subjective evaluation actually comes up. So different emotions may create same physiological response. Well, subjective evaluation tells us that how do we interpret that physiological response to create an appropriate, to understand an appropriate emotion. That is the meaning of the term subjective evaluation. So whenever we feel an emotion, then these 3 changes happen inside us. If you look at these 3 changes in a simpler language, then physiological changes basically means change in your body. Subjective evaluation means change in your mind, and the facial expression means external expression of that internal change. So this is how again we can define emotions in a simple language. We can simply say that emotions are the internal state of body and mind which has an external expression. So that is what we can say, that is how we define emotions here. So that is the idea of emotion, that is we can say, and these 3 changes. So it's in internal state of body and mind. Remember, emotions influence both body and mind. That's why we often say that emotions are at the interface between the body and mind. Interface between the body mind, it involves both body as well as the mind. So that is what we can see we call emotion. That's how it is different from the region. Remember, region occurs only in the mind, and biology is always in the body. Emotions involve both of them. So emotions are that thing inside us in which both body and mind are simultaneously involved. It is the interface, it is the border between the two. One side of the emotion is body and other side of the emotion is mind. So it combines together both physiological as well as the subjective thing of the mind. So that is how emotion is such a complex thing inside us, involving almost so many aspects of our existence, biological existence as well as the psychological existence, mental as well as the bodily. So that is how we can see emotion, and these 3 changes are synchronized with each other. What is the meaning of the term synchronized here? Well, synchronized essentially means, this term synchronized has been derived from two words, syn and chrono. Both of them are the ancient Greek words, syn and chrono. Syn means same, chrono means time. So, things occurring exactly at the same time, they are said to be synchronized with each other. So, that is how synchronized is. So, for example, if my watch tells me 1 minute has passed, suppose your watch also tells you that 1 minute has passed, then we can say that our watches are synchronized with each other. Because both of them tell us about the same change occurring at the same time. They are synchronized. So, two change occurring exactly at the same time are said to be synchronized with each other. So, these three changes are synchronized in the sense that these three changes occur exactly at the same time into our in us. So, then only we call them the emotion. So, these are the four important things that we need to remember when we define emotion throughout the course, whenever we talk about emotions here. That they are brief in duration, number one, they are triggered by a triggering event, they have a cause, they evaluate that cause, and finally they involve synchronized responses between facial expression, physiological changes, and the subjective evaluation of those changes. So, combine together all of these things, what we call emotion. So, in our course, whenever we talk about emotions, then these are the things that you have to keep in mind always. That is what emotions are. This is how we define emotion, this is how we understand emotion. Now, next important thing that I would like to talk about further is, change the paragraph and then after write further, dimensions of emotions. Dimensions of emotions. Write down firstly, there are three dimensions of emotions. There are three dimensions of emotions. Now, since the beginning of this topic, we have been talking about that emotions, can say understand emotion. How do we understand emotion? Now, we talk about understand emotion. We understand emotion in terms of certain dimension. And in this model, well, we often talk about three important dimensions of emotions generally. First important dimension is called arousal. First dimension is called arousal. Now, what is arousal? Write down further. Arousal, write down further. It indicates the change in the energy level of our body. Arousal, it indicates the change in the energy level of our body when we face some emotions. It involves the change in the energy level of our body when we feel some emotions. So, again these words I am using because these words I am introducing here in this class, because throughout the course of emotional intelligence we will be using these terms in our course again and again. So, these terms you should be familiar with. Arousal. So, arousal basically is that dimension of emotion which indicates to us, which tells us that, well, what is the direction. Earlier we have seen that emotions always bring about a change in the energy level of our body. Now, what is the direction of that change? That is what we call the arousal. Direction of that change, you can see which way that this change has happened. Because some emotions, as we have seen earlier, some emotions increase our energy level, some emotions decrease our energy level. Some emotions activate us, some emotions sedate us. So, emotions often change the, you can say, energy level. Direction of that change is what we call the arousal. So, in terms of arousal, there can be, you can say, in terms of arousal, there can be two aspects of this arousal. Emotions can be high arousal emotion in terms of this, or emotions can be low arousal emotion. So, if you look at these primary emotions, for example, then Happiness is a high arousal emotion. Sadness is a low arousal emotion. Fear is a high arousal emotions normally, but sometimes in extreme case, fear can be low arousal also. Low arousal also. You must have seen, particularly in extreme fear, you must have seen, for example, that in extreme fear, we often become immobilized. In extreme fear, we often become freezed. Now, this freezing or immobilization in the extreme fear may also have an important evolutionary function for us to play in general. Now, what is that evolutionary function? Think of it, that these emotions, suppose you are in jungle, and remember, most all these emotions have evolved during the millions of years of evolution that we have gone through when you were in jungles, in the nature. So suppose you are in jungle, you are in a bush, suddenly you observe, you see a lion near you. Now in this case, if you start running away from the lion because of the fear, then the lion may outrun you and you will be eaten. Now in such a situation, it is better for us to become freeze there, so that, well, become like a stone, so that the lion can miss us. So those people who ran always, well, they were eaten by the lion. And those people who became freeze sometimes, immobilized sometimes, well, they survived. And we are the progenitor of these survivors. And because of that, well, we have, and because of that, we have, say, still a tendency to become freezed, or we become immobilized in the face of the emotions. So that is why we still have that tendency in a way. So in extreme fear, sometimes we become totally immobile. We become, our face becomes more like white, for example, well, okay, without any expression, without any change at all. We become more like a stone, so that, well, the predators which is trying to kill us, maybe a threat around us, may miss us, may misunderstand us as a stone rather than as a human being, as a prey. But otherwise, normally you can see fear is a high arousal emotion. Anger is a very strongly high arousal emotion. Disgust is a moderately high arousal emotion. Surprise is also a moderately high arousal emotion. So these are the high arousal or low arousal. This is what first important dimension of emotion is, arousal. Then after, the second important dimension of emotion is, write down further, valence. Again, write down, it involves it involves the it involves our subjective evaluation. It involves our subjective evaluation of an emotion. It involves our subjective evaluation of an emotion. It involves our subjective evaluation of an emotion. As we have seen earlier, that one important aspect of emotion is the subjective evaluation that we do. What is the nature of that subjective evaluation is what we call the valence. Valence wise, emotion can be positive or emotions can be negative. So this term valence, as you may have appreciated already, well, has been taken from chemistry. In chemistry also, each element has a valence. So positive or negative. So chlorine has a positive valence, and you can say, sodium has a positive valence and chlorine has a negative valence. Hydrogen has positive and oxygen has negative. So each element has a valence there. So emotions also have valence. Emotions are either positive or they are negative. We like them or we do not like them. They are pleasant for us and they are unpleasant for us. So valence is essentially the degree of pleasantness or unpleasantness of an emotion. So this is how, if you look at these primary emotions, for example, then, well, happiness is a positive emotion, sadness is a negative emotion, fear is a negative emotion, anger is a negative emotion, disgust is a negative emotion, and surprise can be both positive and negative depending on the higher evaluation. Sometimes we are pleasantly surprised and sometimes we are unpleasantly surprised. So that is how the primary emotions can be understood in terms of these can say dimension. Now if you look at these two basic dimensions of an emotion, then you can appreciate from both of them that, well, that they can say most of our primary emotions are high in arousal and negative in valence. Now high arousal and negative emotions might have played well, more important role in our survival during the evolutionary period. And because of that, we have more high arousal and more negative emotions. So that is how we can see that this is though we don't like negative emotions, they are unpleasant, but still their role perhaps in our survival might have been much stronger. Because of that, we have more high and more negative emotions. So these are the two primary dimensions of the emotions. Now normally if you look at these two dimensions, then we often express both of these two dimensions in the form of a circle. Remember this circle very well, because we are going to use this circle a number of times in our later classes also. We will discuss various aspects of emotional intelligence further. Now, if you look at these dimensions, then what are they? What is the meaning of this circle? The y-axis here is the arousal, so we are high arousal or low arousal. The x-axis is the valence, positive valence, and the negative valence. So each emotion can be described in this case. So all the primary emotions that we have discussed in the previous topic, well, can be put somewhere into this circle. So this can be happiness, for example, well, high arousal and positive valence. This can be fear. This can be anger, high arousal and negative. This can be sadness, well, low arousal and negative valence. This can be disgust, slight moderately high arousal but extremely negative in valence. Surprise can be here or here, both positive or negative, but high arousal moderately. This can be calmness. So sometimes we are low in energy, but still, well, we feel very calm, peaceful, meditative silence type of mental state. That is calmness, meditative silence. So every emotion that we had talked about earlier can be put somewhere into this circle, in this circle. Now, if you look at these primary emotions here in this circle, then each of these emotions we have talked about here, they are not a single emotion. They are a cluster of emotions. They are a group of emotions. So, for example, happiness, there is not a single happiness. There are various types of happiness. All of you know about that. So, joy, for example, joy, pleasure, happiness, excitement, thrill, ecstasy, there are all various types of happiness. Similarly, if you look at anger, anger is not a single emotion. Anger also is a cluster of emotion, a family of emotion. There are various types of anger that we know. So we all know about anger, like for example, irritation, frustration, anger, rage, outrage, etc., etc. So all of these are the various form of anger, a cluster of anger. Similarly, fear. There is not a single fear. There are many different types of fear, like anticipation, fear, stress, tension, nervousness, panic, horror, terror. There are all various forms of fear. So each of these emotions, if you look at it, they are not a single emotion. They are a cluster of emotion. They are a group of emotions. So they are a cluster of emotion. They are the group of emotion in a way, each of them. So it is instructive for you people to know that what are these emotions. If you want to know, I will not discuss much detail in my class here, that will become too complicated here. But if you want to learn more about that, then I may suggest you you can say source material. You can visit a website sometimes that may help you to understand many of these variations. There is a beautiful website you can say made and maintained by Paul Ekman, the person who gave us the 6 primary emotions. So he himself and his daughter Eva Ekman had created and are maintaining a website made under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. Because ideas of Dalai Lamas and Buddhism particularly is very important in the emotional intelligence paradigm. We'll see the role of Dalai Lama, the role of Buddhism rather, not Dalai Lama as such, role of Buddhism in emotional intelligence in the next class. So that also we will talk about next. So you can visit that website. Now name of that, let me tell you the name. Name of that website is the atlasofemotions.org. Atlasofemotions.org. So visit that website and well try to find out what the different variation of all these emotions. So that will help you to understand emotions in a much better manner, because in later class we will talk about one of the very important aspect of emotional intelligence is to have a good emotional vocabulary. So you must try to inculcate, you must try to make a good emotional vocabulary. And well, these websites on these source material can possibly help you to enrich your emotional vocabulary that you can use in many answers at different places. So that is the valence You can say these two dimensions are put somewhere on this circle here. So that is what we call the circle of emotion. If you look at this circle, for example, then arousal dimension, the y-axis is basically the state of your body and x-axis is the state of your mind. A state of your body and the state of your mind. So every point of this circle indicates some particular state of your body and your mind. That is what we call emotion. So that's why I told you yesterday, emotions are something which is always there with us. So some state is already there inside you. Something is happening in your body and mind. The moment they can become synchronized, suddenly, wow, it is the emotion. We recognize that. But even if you don't recognize that, then also something is going into our body and mind. Emotions indicate that what goes on inside you. That is what emotions are. Two dimensions are the important one. But there is a third dimension also. Write down. Action tendency. Action tendency. Now write down further. Every emotion creates a tendency in us. Every emotion creates a tendency in us to act in a certain manner. Every emotion creates a tendency in us to act in a certain manner. That is called action tendency. So that is the next important thing. Every emotion, as we have seen earlier also, emotion is about motion. It creates a motion tendency, action tendency inside us. That is what we call. So in terms of action tendency, emotion can be approach emotion or it can be withdrawal emotion. Some emotions allow us to move towards the triggering event and some emotions make us to move away from the triggering event. So that is the action tendency towards and away from that. So approach and withdrawal. So if you look at the primary emotion that we had talked about earlier, then happiness is an approach emotion. We try to move towards the things, person, place, etc. or events that make us happy. It is an approach emotion. Sadness is a withdrawal emotion. Sadness is a withdrawal emotion because, well, we often try to move away from the things that make thing, place, person, event, etc. that makes us sad. Fear is a strong withdrawal emotion. We try to feel like running away from the things that are threatening for us. Anger is what do you think anger would be? Approach or withdrawal? Well, some of you might possibly say, many of my students say, sir, it is a withdrawal. But no, anger is a very strong approach emotion. Very strong approach emotion. So in anger, for example, well, we don't try to run away from the anger producing things or object or person maybe. We try to punch that person on his face. We approach negatively, but we nevertheless approach. Just think of it, two people are fighting with each other. How difficult it is to separate them. They stick together like a glue. So anger brings people closure, negatively closure, but nevertheless closure. So that is an approach emotion. Disgust is a very strong withdrawal emotion, very strong withdrawal tendency. Think of it, you are suddenly sitting somewhere, suddenly there is a foul smell is there. If there is a foul smell, then how strongly you feel like running away from that place. Suppose you are in the area of sewer, for example, some industry where a very foul smell is there. So in this case, we feel like running away from that place as soon as we possibly can. It creates a strong withdrawal tendency inside us. Withdrawal emotion. And surprise can be both approach as well as withdrawal. Both approach and withdrawal depending on whether it is positive or negative. So that is how you can say these emotions can be. So these are the three important dimensions that can help us to understand the emotions, its nature, etc. That is how we understand emotion. That is how we describe emotion in a way. Understanding this table that we have made here can help you a lot in many, you can say, answers. A few years ago, for example, there was a question that anger is a negative emotion. What is its impact on the thought and behavior, and how can we control anger? Now this answer you can write in three parts. First part of your answer should be the description of anger. That anger is a negative emotion. What does that mean? Now you can write all this. Anger, first of all, increase your arousal, increase your energy level, arousal. It is a negative emotion. It is an unpleasant emotion for us, and it creates a approach. But remember, you have to write something more about approach, because nature of approach can differ. In anger also we approach, and in happiness also we approach. But there is a difference between the approach of anger and approach of happiness. In anger, for example, we try to hit the other person, harm the other person, scream, shout. You can say something like this one: violence, aggression, etc. But in the case of happiness approach, well, we are more soft and tender. We like hugging, kissing, or you can say soft touch. Soft approach is there, positive approach is there in the case of anger. Sorry, in the case of happiness. So you have to describe a little more that what is the nature of approach in the case of anger. So that would be first part of your answer. Second and third part we will talk about later on. In the next class we will talk about how does anger influence your behavior and thought, and in a later class we will talk about how can we control anger. So there was a question about anger. There can be question about other emotions also. We can write the answer of these questions on the basis of similar things that we have discussed here. So that is how we understand emotions in terms of its various dimensions. So that is the thing. Now, next important thing so this is all about emotions and its various aspects. Now, next important thing that we will talk about now is, change the paragraph and then after write further, the structure of human brain. The structure of brain. The structure of human brain. Now, as I told you yesterday, that when we study the emotional intelligence, then we often take the structure of human brain as a reference to understand the emotion and the related phenomena. So that is one thing that we have to understand. So it is important for us to understand that structure of human brain briefly. So we will have to study a little of biology. Okay, before that let me see if there is a question. I think there is some question. Sir, how physiological changes help in the polygraph test, Nimai? Yes, Nimai, I hope you got your answer. Somali, sir, how to approach the quote-based questions being asked in the ethics paper? Look at the quote, understand the meaning of that, forget about the person who wrote the quote, and forget about the context also in which the quote was written. Just look at the quotation, understand the meaning, and then after describe that, what is the meaning of, what do you understand by that quote, number one, give an example of that, number two, if you remember, and third, what is the relevance of this quote in the recent time. These are the three things that you have to write, and writing these things well, the philosophy that we have discussed earlier will help you for that. So we will talk about that in some later class, but this is how we have to do. Three parts again: describe the quote, well, talk about its relevance in today's time, and give an example of that thing. That is it. And description as well as its relevance, you can take the ideas from the previous classes that we have discussed, and these classes also that we will discuss tomorrow, next week onwards. They are very simple questions. Try to write some of them, you will find. Next question, Subhashri. Sir, in case of identifying crime, we have seen uses of narco-analysis and polygraph test. While it is not considered as concrete evidence of proving a crime, as emotional analysis is done in those cases, the term used by you, consummate liar, is used in these cases. Yes, Subhashri, you are very right. So, emotional analysis is actually done in these cases, because emotions are normally, well, more honest than the rationality. Rationality often makes us to lie. We will talk about lying and the emotional. But you are right, you can say to a great extent, that emotions are normally more truthful, and you can say the rationality often makes us to lie also. So in these cases, normally we try to, you can say, strengthen the emotional response, and we try to suppress the rational part of the person, because lying is a rational act, remember. So in the case of polygraph test as well as in the case of narco analysis, we try to suppress the rational aspect, and we try to, we can say, increase the, try to, you can say, more emphasize the emotional aspect of your response. Yes, you are right. Consummate liar is those people who can actually make their emotions also to lie in a way. That is very difficult for most of us common people. Yes, they are the consummate liars. Next question, Braja. If facial expression change but other two does not change, then we can't say that it is emotion. most of persons whose facial expression change due to emotion. Yes, Braja, you are right. If only facial expression changes and other things are not there, then that will not be an emotion. This is what actors do in many films. So they do not feel an emotion, but still they can change their expression to tell us that they are feeling an emotion. That is a type of deception. Indeed. So only facial expression changes in accordance with emotional emotion-like expression, but internal changes does not happen, then that will not be an emotion. That will be an acting. There is a difference between acting and emotion, isn't it? So emotions will happen only when all the three is there. So that is what it is. Most of the persons whose facial expression change due to emotion, yes, is very difficult, almost next to impossible to control the emotion against the facial expression. Some change always happens. And if you are a more empathy class, we'll talk more about that in a later class. But if you are more empathic, then perhaps it will be difficult for somebody to lie to you. Some change on the face always happens when we do something. Well, we feel some emotion inside us. Very subtle maybe, but always. Well, structure of the human brain, that is the next thing that we will talk about. So the idea here is that as I told you that in order to understand emotion related phenomena, it is important for us to understand the Madan sir, what is the attribute of an emotionally intelligent administrator, Madan? This is what we will discuss throughout the course, Madan. So wait for that, hold on for that. Now, so it is important for us to know the can say the structure of human brain also to understand the emotional phenomena better. Now, if you look at the structure of, again, we are not going to talk too much about biology, we will talk a little about that. Some of the basic thing that we think is important for us to understand the whole phenomena. Now, if you look at, again, the structure of human brain, then you will see that human brain can be considered to consist of three parts. So this is one of the most common, at least from our standard, from our standpoint, this is the most commonly, you can say, accepted division of the human brain. Human brain that we talk about, triune division as we call it. In 1960s, it was proposed by a neuroscientist called Paul McLean. So that is the, you can say, thing first of all. Three parts. So three parts of human brain can be understood. First one is, write down. Simply you can write down, I will not dictate much here. Brain stem. First part is brain stem. Now, brain stem is the oldest part of our brain, evolutionarily speaking. So, brain stem, you can say, if you look at biologically, then it consists of our, well, spinal cord and the tip of the spinal cord. So, back of your brain, this part, lower brain as we call it sometimes. So, it is the spinal cord and the tip of the spinal cord. It is the oldest part of human brain. It might have evolved hundreds of millions of years ago in the history of evolution. And among the reptiles, it is the most evolved part of the brain. That is why sometimes we also call it reptilian brain. But brainstem does not play any role in our emotional life. That's why I will not talk about brainstem as such in our class here. Brainstem is essentially responsible for the automatic functions of human body, like respiration, natural heart rate, etc., on which we don't have any control, voluntary control, automatic function, the involuntary functions. So that is brainstem. Let's not talk about that. It does not play any role in the emotional experience that we have. Now, the second part of our brain, which is the most important from our point of view, is called limbic system. Limbic system. So, limbic system is the most important part of our brain as far as emotions are concerned. So important it is that many people call this limbic system also as the emotional brain. Emotional brain. And limbic system, biologically speaking, it is located, it is something that is a ring-like structure that surrounds the brain stem in the form of concentric circles. Concentric rings rather. So it surrounds the brain stem in the form of concentric rings. It's a ring-like structure. The word limb itself means ring in Latin language. So it's a ring-like structure. So, and can say historically, evolutionary history, that it is normally assumed that this limbic system started evolving around 150 million years ago in the history of evolution. 150 million years ago. Because of that, all those animals which have evolved during the last 150 years, they have some form of limbic system. And they can feel some form of emotions, that some basic emotions that we are also capable of feeling. So that is limbic system, most important part of emotional brain as we call it. Now limbic system also has many parts. Brain stem also has many parts like pons, medulla oblongata, etc. Limbic system also has many parts, but I will not discuss all the parts of limbic system, but two important parts of limbic system I will like to talk about here. First one is this, you can write here, amygdala. First is called amygdala. Now amygdala, just write down one line here. Amygdala is the center of our emotional experience. Amygdala is the center of our emotional experience and memory. Amygdala is the center of our emotional experience and memory. Now that is what, but before that, amygdala, if you look at it, amygdala is a small almond shaped organ, almond, badam. So it's a small almond. In fact, the word amygdala in Latin means almond. So it is a synonymous of almond. English we call almond, in Hindi we call it badam, and in Latin we call this almond. So sorry, amygdala. So amygdala is a small almond shaped size organ, very dense, you can say, set of tissues in that sense, and we have two amygdalae inside us, on the left side of the brainstem and right side, both the side of the brainstem at the center we have two. So we have one amygdala here and other amygdala here. So on the two sides of the brainstem we have these two amygdalae. So that is the biological location of amygdala. Amygdala, as you wrote here shortly, that amygdala is the center of our emotional experience and memory. What does that mean? It means simply that amygdala is the, you can say, center of emotional experience first of all, which means that whenever we feel an emotion, that there is always some change in our amygdala, some activity in our amygdala is concurrently found. Suppose for example, you are experiencing some strong emotion like anger, fear, nervousness, panic, excitement, thrill, happiness, etc. And if your brain is scanned under an fMRI scan, then there will be sudden activity in your amygdala will be found. Reverse is also true, that if I generate some activity in your amygdala by giving some electrical stimulation to you, then suddenly you will find that, well, you will start feeling the symptoms of emotion like increased heartbeat or that subjective feeling of experience. So it is the center of our emotional experience, number one, but more importantly, it is the center of our emotional memory also. We have a large number of emotional memory. So a large number of emotional memory as well. We have, our memory has two components, rational part of our memory and the emotional part of our memory. So each memory, each experience that we have in our life has a rational component and an emotional component. So rational component is stored in maybe in our hippocampus, maybe another part of the limbic system itself, and emotional part of our memory is perhaps stored in our amygdala. It is something like this. Suppose for example, in the last summer vacation, maybe suppose you went to Leh Ladakh for your vacation. You spent 15 days there, 1 week there, and you enjoyed a lot. Now in this whole vacation, there are two parts of your memory was. One was the rational part, that which flight you took, at what time you reached there, which hotel you stayed, who are the staff members or places that you visited, some information about the places, the taxi that you took, the driver that was there, guide that was there with you. So all these things. So these things you can say they are the rational part. But at the same time you enjoyed a lot. Now this feeling that you got, enjoyment, will be stored into your amygdala. So much so that next time when you think about, you can say, your experience of Ladakh, then you think about Ladakh for example, suddenly you will start feeling good. The moment you hear the name of Leh and Ladakh for example, you will start feeling good. That feeling good that you have at the mention of Ladakh, maybe it is because of It is because of the amygdala and its emotional memory. So every experience that you have is stored into your amygdala in the form of emotional memory. So that is what we can say, it is there. Suppose for example, and emotional memory is much stronger than the rational memory. You may forget the rational aspect, but emotional aspect will still be there. Just think of it, that suppose there is a small child who is playing with a dog. Suddenly the dog starts barking. Suddenly the dog starts. Now the child will become extremely afraid. Now this fear of the child will be stored in his amygdala as an emotional memory, so that next time when the child will see even a normal dog, a friendly dog for example, he will still start having the symptoms of fear. This is how many people say that many phobias might be acquired. We don't remember the initial event under which that emotional experience occurred, but emotional memory still remains with us. We may forget the rational part of that event, we don't remember anything about that, but emotional experience still is stored into our amygdala, and it keeps on creating responses to us in a later time as well. So that is how emotional memory is much stronger. Every experience that we have, well, it has a rational component, and even this classroom for example, well, has a rational component. When you get all the information, it has emotional component also, that how do you feel while attending this classroom. And that feeling part will play a very important role in your performance, in examination also, as we will see maybe in the next class today itself. So that is how you can say emotional memory influences our, you can say it is stored into our amygdala. That is the first important thing. And second part of our limbic system is called thalamus. Second part of our limbic system is called thalamus. Now thalamus, if you look at it, then we often call thalamus as a type of relay center or broadcasting center of our brain. What is the meaning of the term relay center or broadcasting center? Think of it. Suppose for example, imagine, suppose this is your eye, and suppose you see something through your eyes. Well, you see only through your eyes, so it is a redundancy, but you see something. Now, I hope that you all are aware of this type of diagram in the 7th standard physics textbook, not in biology. In physics textbook, perhaps you might have read these type of diagram. So when we see something in the world outside, then its inverted image is formed on the retina through the lens that we have, and retina converts that into you can say image into neural impulse, which passes through an optic nerve to our thalamus. Because thalamus, if you look at it, thalamus biologically, it is an egg-shaped organ, a little larger than the amygdala, egg-shaped, egg-sized organ, and we have one thalamus inside us between the two amygdala, almost at the geometrical center of our brain. So this is where we have a thalamus. Now both of the eyes are connected to that thalamus through the optic nerve. So this information goes to thalamus first of all. Now thalamus sends that information. It recognizes that this information is a visual information coming from eye on the basis of the nature of the neural impulse, and this information is sent to our, you can say visual cortex. This information is sent to our visual cortex, which is at the back of our brain at this point, where the visual cortex recognizes what is the meaning of that object. It is something like this one. Suppose for example, right now I see this marker here, then it's the inverted image of that marker will be formed on my retina, which will send it to thalamus, which will send it to my visual cortex, where my cortex will determine that this object that has been seen here is a electronic board marker. So this is how we recognize the thing that is happening there. So similarly, for example, you hear a sound through your ears. That sound also in the form of neural impulse goes to the thalamus. Thalamus will send that to your auditory cortex, which is at the top of your brain at this point, where we recognize what is the meaning of that sound. Suppose for example, you hear a barking of a dog. Now that information will go to your thalamus. Thalamus will send that to the auditory cortex, where the cortex will determine that this sound that is coming to me is the barking of a dog. Similarly, you can see that, well, we smell something. That also goes to the thalamus, and after thalamus will send to the other part of your brain, where, well, your brain will recognize that what is the meaning of that smell. Or you taste something, that also will go to thalamus. First thalamus will send that to the different part of the brain, in where we will recognize that what is the meaning of that taste, whether that taste is salty and salty, sour, sweet or bitter. These are the four primary tastes are there. Similarly, for example, you touch something. Now that touch also first of all go to your thalamus, and thalamus will send that to the different part of the brain for higher processing. What is the meaning of that touch? So you all know that we have five sense organs, and through the five sense organs we can perceive five type of information in us. Five types of information. So from the eyes we get the visual information about the world, from the ears auditory information, sound, from nose olfactory information, smell, from tongue gustatory information, taste, and through the skin we get three types of information: temperature, pressure, and acidity, chemical sense that gives us sensation of pain, etc. So these are the five important sense organs are there in us, and through these five sense organs, we get five types of information from the world. Five types of information. And well, on the basis of those five types of information, we make sense of the world that we are actually living in. So that is how we can say. So these five sense organs are the window to our mind, window of our mind to the world. It is through these sense organs that we actually see and understand the world outside that we are living in. In that case, well, thalamus works as a center point. It is a type of, this is why we say it a relay center. It collects all the information about the world and relays that to the different part of our brain for higher processing, for further processing maybe. So it is like communication satellite, collecting information from, well, the TV can say relay station and broadcasting that to the other part of the world for further viewing, further understanding, further comprehension. This is what thalamus does. We'll see that what exactly thalamus does for, what is role of thalamus in the emotional experience shortly in the next topic. But this is what thalamus does for us. That is the thalamus. Now there are other parts also in the limbic system, but I will not discuss much detail like hippocampus, hypothalamus, nucleus accumbens, many other parts are there. I will not talk about all of them. This is the only thing that is required. Then after we have the third part of our brain. Second part was limbic system, and third part we will talk about, you can write it further, the neocortex. Third part of our brain, neocortex. Now, neocortex is the most important part of our brain overall. All the rational activity that we as a human being do is actually located in the, is done in the neocortex. So much so that we often call neocortex as the rational brain. We call the neocortex as the rational brain. So all the rational activity take place in the neocortex itself. So we have two brains now, emotional brain in limbic system and rational brain in the neocortex. Now where does the neocortex actually reside in our brain? Well, neocortex is something, if you look at biologically, the neocortex surrounds the limbic system in the form of, well, external outer layer. Starting from our forehead to the back of it. This external part of our brain, surface part of our brain is what we call the neocortex. It is in this part of the brain where all the rational activity like perception, attention, thinking, planning, etc., etc., all the rational activity take place in that part of the brain, language, that part of the brain itself. So this is what we can say the neocortex is. Now neocortex is a part of the brain where all the rational size of the neocortex, you know, according to the biological thinkers, evolutionary thinkers, neocortex started evolving around 100 million years ago in the history of evolution. 100 million years. So all those animals which has evolved during the last 100 million years, they have some form of neocortex and they can have some type of comprehension or understanding of the world the way we can have. So that is what we can say the neocortex are historically. Now size of the neocortex determines, actually relative size of the neocortex determines how intelligent that animal will be. So relative to the whole brain, larger is the neocortex, more intelligent that animal will be. and we, the human beings, have the largest neocortex in the animal kingdom. In our brain, think of it, in our brain, almost two-thirds, 66.66% of our brain is made up of neocortex. It is because of this huge, large neocortex that we have that we are so intelligent, if you believe in that. Many people doubt it, but if you believe that we are so intelligent, it is because of the large neocortex. The evolution has given us a huge, gigantic neocortex. It is because of this neocortex, large neocortex, that we have been able to rule the world now, control the whole earth. So dinosaurs at one point of time ruled the world because of the physical strength and size that they had. Physically, we are very weak animal, but it is because of the large neocortex that we have that we are able to rule the whole, control the whole earth. We are going beyond the earth also to the moon. Just today, a few hours later, we are going to moon also, and Mars and Venus also. So that is how we can say our neocortex has actually helped us to monopolize the earth, to become the master of the earth, to become the ruler of the earth. That is the neocortex. No other animal is even close to that size of neocortex. That is the neocortex. Now, neocortex also has many parts. Neocortex is often divided in terms of lobe. We have frontal lobe, then after parietal lobe, occipital lobe. So, medial temporal lobe inside us. So, we have many lobes inside us. I will not discuss that in my class. They are very dense tissue structure, curled. So dense that in order to fit that into our skull, they have to be curled. So, they are curled structure, very dense structure, visibly identifiable. Okay, this is neocortex and that is the other part. So, that is there. So, we will not talk about all the part of the neocortex here, but I will talk about one part of the neocortex here which is important for us, and that part is known as PFC, prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex. So, prefrontal cortex, if you look at it, it basically lives, biologically it is there in this part of our brain, just behind our forehead and above our eyes. So, that part of our brain consists of the prefrontal cortex. And what does the prefrontal cortex do? Prefrontal cortex is actually the executive function of part of our brain. It is in this part that all the executive, rational, voluntary activity of our brain take place there. So, that is what precon. So, all the rational, controllable, voluntary action in our mind like thinking, planning, problem solving, memorizing, recalling, plan, you can say the judgment, decision making, reasoning, all of these activity take place in the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is the center of our conscious rational activity. We will see the role of neocortex or prefrontal cortex in the emotional experience shortly. Of course, we call that as PFC. Remember this word PFC, we will be using that a number of times in our later classes. So, this is how our emotions are, our brain is structured. Now, the next important question is that how is it that all these structures combine together to give us such a complex emotional experience that we as a human beings are capable of having. Let's briefly talk about, let's call that as mechanism of emotional experience. Mechanism of emotional experience. Now, try to understand what we are talking about. This mechanism will help us to understand many aspects of emotional intelligence that we will be talking about in our later classes. Now, in order to understand this mechanism of emotional experience, we will take one small example further. Think about that example. Suppose, for example, take the same example that we talked about earlier. Suppose, for example, this is your eye and you see something. As we have just now seen, that inverted image of that object is created on our retina, which will convert that into the neural impulse, which will go to our thalamus, and thalamus will send that to our neocortex. Now, we can name that part also, like say visual cortex, where our visual cortex will determine what that object is. This is what we have already seen. Now, suppose this object that we have seen here is an emotionally relevant object. So, emotionally relevant object. Now, if emotionally relevant object is there, then on the basis of that perception, your brain will recognize that this object is emotionally relevant. So it will send that information to our amygdala. Amygdala is a part of limbic system, remember. It will send that information to amygdala, and based on that, our amygdala will generate the appropriate emotion. Think of it. Suppose, for example, this object that we have seen outside is a snake on the ground. Now, the image of that snake will be formed on a retina, which will be sent to the thalamus, which will send it to the visual cortex, where the visual cortex will determine that this curly object seen on the ground is a snake, which is threatening, which is dangerous, which is harmful. So it will send that information to amygdala, and on the basis of that information, our amygdala will generate the emotion of fear. We start having all those feelings, change heartbeat, blood pressure, well, and tendency to run away, etc., etc. That is how it happens. Earlier it was thought that this is all which happens in such a case. But in one of the most important discovery of the neuroscience in the last 50 years, 60 years maybe, it has been found that between thalamus and amygdala, there is a direct connection is there of a nerve. A single neuron perhaps that connects the thalamus with the amygdala. So thin it is that earlier it was not even known. But today we know that there is a single neuron that connects thalamus directly with the amygdala, and now this discovery has actually changed our way of understanding the emotional experience. So our current understanding is that when we get the information about the world through our sense organ to thalamus, then most of that information goes to the cortex, of course, but a small part of that information, maybe 1%, maybe 2%, maybe 5%, maybe 10%, depending on many factors. So some part of that information directly goes to amygdala, and based on that information, our amygdala has already started acting much before our brain actually understands, recognizes what that object has happened. Because information coming from here to here, it takes some time, a few milliseconds maybe. Information being processed there also takes some time, a few milliseconds. Remember, our brain works in the milliseconds. 1 millisecond is 1,000th of a second. And information coming from here to here, it also takes some time, a few milliseconds more. So the total, according to some estimate, the total time taken in whole process is around 250 milliseconds. That is the standard reaction time of a normal human brain. So whenever something happens in the world and we are ready to respond to that, almost 250 milliseconds have passed. 1/4 of a second, quarter of a second. That is the standard reaction time of a normal human brain. That is the time that our brain takes to make sense of the change that has happened in the world. But this information goes to amygdala in much shorter time, maybe a few milliseconds, maybe even microseconds, because this is much closer to it biologically, you can say the physically. So much before our brain actually gets ready to react to the situation, our amygdala has already made some evaluation, and on the basis of that preliminary evaluation, it has already started acting. Later on, a few moments later, when our brain gives you that information to the amygdala, then based on that, we change our response. We actually, well, you can say improve, modify our response. So now we can see that whenever something significant happens in our brain, in our environment around us, our brain responds twice. Think of it. Our brain responds twice. First of all, let's call that as pure emotional reaction. A pure emotional reaction that happens because of that change that we talked about, that information. So there is no involvement of the brain is already there. It is just the emotional reaction, raw emotion. So raw emotion, pure emotion. Now this reaction, as we have seen, is very fast. It is almost simultaneous. Rather, not simultaneous, spontaneous, let's call it. Very fast or spontaneous. So very fast, almost maybe in microseconds, maybe a few milliseconds it can respond, very fast. But since it is so fast, so it pays a heavy price of being fast. What is that price? That it is comparatively less in accuracy. It is often less in accuracy because there is always a trade-off between speed and accuracy. Higher is the speed, lesser will be accuracy. If you reduce the speed, accuracy might possibly go high. So there is often a trade-off between the speed and accuracy. Speed is high, so accuracy will be low. Accuracy is low also because this reaction rather is a little, say, unintelligent reaction, unprocessed reaction, or unintelligent. Unprocessed or unintelligent reaction it is. So no intelligence is involved, no processing is involved, no mind is involved in that. So that is why this is the first reaction. Then after second reaction happens, let's call that as emotional rational reaction. It is emotional, of course, but some amount of rational input is there into it because involvement of the brain is already there. So it is a little delayed response. It is delayed in the sense that around by 250 milliseconds if you believe in that data. And since it is a little delayed, so it is comparatively high in accuracy. It is comparatively higher in accuracy. It is also high in accuracy because it is a more processed response and more intelligent response. So whenever we experience something in the world around us, something significant, emotionally at least, then our brain responds twice. First response is very fast, less accurate, unprocessed. Second response is a little delayed, more accurate, and well, more processed and all. Think about it. It very often happens in our day-to-day life. Think about some day-to-day example. Suppose, for example, you are in a semi-dark room. Suddenly you see some curly object on the ground. Now, without realizing what that object is, suddenly your heart started pounding. And moments later, you suddenly realize that this curly object on the ground is a rope, not a snake. Now, suddenly you become calm. What happened? Now, first time, remember, when the moment you see the curliness of the object again on the ground, then that small information that is curly will make your amygdala to respond very fast. But moments later, your brain, which gets most of the information, realizes, oh, it's not a snake, it is simply a rope. Then after your brain sends that information to your amygdala, telling it, please calm down, there is nothing to be worried about. It is safe, it is just a rope. You become calm down. So first reaction was fast and second was slightly delayed. First was inaccurate, rope can be considered as a snake, and second was a little more, you can say, accurate. Or suppose you are standing somewhere, suddenly there is a sound behind you. Without knowing anything, suddenly your heart starts pounding. And moments later you realize that this sound is a sound created by a naughty child who is whistling behind you, and you become normal. Now, the moment that sound came up, without realizing what that sound is, you suddenly started acting. That was because of this pathway. That very fast but inaccurate comparatively. But second information that came through the brain, where you analyze that, okay, it is just a harmless sound created by a naughty child, then your brain tells you, amygdala, please calm down, there is nothing to be worried about. You become calm down. You are standing on the road, suddenly somebody honks behind you. Now, without knowing anything, you simply jump. And moments later, you realize that this honking is done by irritating driver who is testing his horn perhaps. You become normal, or you get angry at him maybe also. Now, this is how we can say every time when such significant change happens around us, then we respond twice, the very fast and comparatively delayed. Now, remember that you can say the pure emotional response is less in accuracy. And lack of accuracy is not a big concern for emotional intelligence, emotional mind. Remember, because emotions are not much bothered about accuracy. Whose concern is the accuracy? Well, rationality. Rational mind is more bothered about accuracy. Emotional mind does not bother much about accuracy. That is an important thing. But there is a logic behind that also. It is not something that is random. There is a logic behind that accuracy also. That can say unconcerned for lack of concern for the accuracy. What is that logic? Think of it. Suppose, for example, whenever you are in a threatening situation, then there are two mistakes that you can make in that situation. Suppose, for example, there is a threat in front of you and you have to respond that. You have to give a response to that. Suppose, for example, threat is the lion around you and your response is to run away from the lion. Now, in this situation, when there is a threat and we have to respond to that threat, then in such a situation we can make two mistakes. Mistake number 1 and mistake number 2. First mistake is that when there is a threat but you don't run, don't respond. That is a mistake. Second mistake can be that there is no threat, you still run. Both of them are mistake. But suppose, for example, if you have to make a mistake, then which mistake you would, as a rational person, which mistake would you like to make more? Of course, anybody will say that I will prefer to make this mistake rather than that mistake. Why so? Because if you make this mistake, again remember the threat is lion and your response is to run away from that. Now if you make this mistake, what is the consequence of that? Consequence of that is a certain death. Well, you will be eaten, you are dead. What is the consequence of this mistake? In this mistake you can see that you are wasting lots of your energy. Which is better? Death is better or losing your energy is better? Of course, losing your energy is better. We can reacquire your energy later. So this is what we can see that now what do we call this lack of, can say, that willingness to spend energy in this manner? Well, we call that as anxiety. We call that as anxiety. What is anxiety? Can you tell me what is the difference between, say, anxiety and say fear? I hope some of you can tell me. Well, fear is a situation when there is a real threat is there and we respond to that. Anxiety is a situation when there is no threat, we still respond. There is nothing to be worried about, but we keep on worrying. That is what we call anxiety. So this is something that creates anxiety. There is nothing to run away from, but you still run. So there is nothing to respond to, but you still respond. That is what we call anxiety. So rationally you can see this is better than that. And it is for this reason that we, the human beings, are so prone to anxiety. Anxiety is such an important part of our life. Emotions always create that anxiety for us. It always allows us, motivate us to act even when there is no threat. Now it may appear to be irrational for our rational mind, but evolutionarily speaking, it might have played a very, very important role in our survival. Remember that emotions are a type of emergency alarm system. It alarms us, it alerts us about some threat around us. And like any other alarm system, emotions are hypersensitive. A small sign of danger and it jumps to the response. So that, well, nothing should be left to chance. That is the reason that emotions do not bother much about the accuracy in that case. So that is how emotional responses are important for us here. This is why you can say it does not bother much about the inaccuracy. That's why I told you yesterday that emotions are intelligent in themselves. This is one important intelligence of the emotion. What is that intelligence? Well, that intelligence simply is that, well, it can prevent the death in that case by being hyperactive sometimes. So this is what happens mostly. Normal condition. But in some extraordinary condition, you can say something else can also happen. Suppose, for example, here I told you that most often what happens that our emotions, amygdala is often controlled by our rational mind, neocortex. But sometimes because of some reason, which we will discuss in much detail in later classes, because of some reason, well, our amygdala can become hyperactive. Our amygdala can become hyperactive. Now, when it becomes extremely hyperactive, then instead of being controlled by the brain like this, it starts controlling our brain in return. This situation, when our brain becomes a slave of our amygdala or emotion, we call that hyperactive amygdala. We call that situation as emotional hijack. We call that as emotional hijack, that emotions have hijacked our, well, neocortex, our rational brain in a way. In this situation of emotional hijack, our moral sense is often lost. What is a moral sense? Moral sense is our natural sense to judge the right from the wrong. We will talk about that sense in tomorrow's class, next class, more detail. But we all have a natural sense to judge things as right and wrong without any rational calculus. Just feel, oh, this is right. So that is called moral sense, that is called the moral judgment. So that is, you can say, so in this situation moral sense is often lost. We don't know what is right and wrong, and in that situation, you know, that a normal person also can commit a very serious and heinous crime that he or she otherwise would never have committed. Such crime, in law also we have a special name for such a crime. We often call that as crime of passion, which we often differentiate between from the so called cold blooded crime. Cold blooded. What is a crime of passion? Crime of passion is the one in which passion is very strong. Passion means a strong emotion. Emotions are very strong, so strong they are that, well, they start controlling, capturing, hijacking our brain. We don't know what is right and wrong, we simply do what our emotions tell us to do that. Cold-blooded crime, on the other hand, well, in this case, people know what is right and wrong. They think, they plan, and then after they execute the plan. In the case of crime of passion, there is no plan, there is no thinking, it's just a spur of the moment crime. In law also, we often can say differentiate between the two. If you use the Kantian terminology, then cold-blooded crime can be an autonomous act which may lead to the moral guilt, higher guilt. And crime of passion may be a heteronomous act, in which case moral guilt may be possibly a little lesser. Forget about morality, but this is what happens. So, in such a situation, a normal person also can commit a crime which otherwise normally that person would never have committed. If you read the newspaper, then every day you can find some cases where such crime of passion you can find out. A few years ago, I was reading a news in Delhi that the headline of that news was that a person killed his friend for the sake of 100 rupees. I was surprised, how can somebody kill for the sake of 100 rupees? It is impossible, rationally speaking. I read the whole, these headlines are very misleading from our point of view. I read the whole news. The news was that there were two laborers were there. Somebody had given them a tip of 100 rupees, and they were he told that person, okay, distribute that among yourself. Now, in the evening, both of these two people went to consume liquor. This is liquor, and they consumed liquor for 20 rupees. So, desi liquor, and then after rest of the 80 rupees they had to distribute among themselves. So, one of the persons said that, well, I will take 50 rupees because that person had asked me to take 50. And the second person said, no, we will distribute that in 40-40 equally. They started arguing with you. Last time I had given you that much, last time we had. So, keep on talking about, and this argument became so heated that at one point of time, one person perhaps suffered from an emotional hijack. He had a knife in his pocket, took the knife out and stabbed the other person to death. Now, this murder did not happen for the sake of 100 rupees. Rationally speaking, nobody today can kill somebody for the sake of 100 rupees. How much is the 100 rupees? But in that case, so the debate actually started by 100 rupees, but it was no longer the question of 100 rupees. So it became more emotionally charged situation, and because of the emotional hijack, he was not able to control himself, and, well, murder happened, and, well, one person died, and the person perhaps will spend the rest of his life in jail because of that. So this is where emotional hijack actually occurs. Many cases of road rage that happens on the road, well, it happens because of the emotional hijack. So every day in the newspapers you can find some case like that where emotional hijack actually makes people to do such a heinous crime like this. Forget about crime. Even in our daily life also, we, the normal people who do not commit crime like this one, we also suffer from emotional hijack, and we pay a heavy price of that. Think of it. Suppose you are angry at your friend and you are shouting at your friend in blind anger. In that shouting, suddenly you will feel that you will become more and more angry. At one point of time, you start speaking all the bad and nasty thing to your friend, which later on, well, you yourself realize that I should not have spoken. You feel that when you come back to your sense, then you realize, no, I was very bad, I was very nasty, I should not have spoken like this. You feel sorry, you go to your friend, you try to apologize also, that please don't mind, I was angry. But at the time when you are angry, then you do not realize how bad and nasty you are. And sometimes we can say it may actually cost us a relationship. It may actually cost us a job in an interview, for example. So even in normal people sometimes suffer from the emotional hijack, and that may sometimes have a serious consequence for them. So one aspect of one very important part of emotional intelligence is to keep yourself in control under the situation of emotional hijack. That is what we have to See, we'll talk about how this can be done in our self-control class later on, self-regulation class later on. So that is how we can see emotional experience happen to us in ordinary circumstances like this, and extraordinary circumstances like that. So that is the mechanism of emotional experience, both ordinary and extraordinary, both normal and both abnormal, maybe, if you call it. So that is how we can understand the emotional experience mechanism. Now, last important topic in this introduction section that we will talk about is, change the paragraph and then after write further, emotions and thought. Emotions and thought. Now write down firstly, our emotions influence our thought. Our emotions influence our thought in at least two ways. Our emotions influence our thought in at least two ways. First one, write down, by influencing the availability of information to us. By influencing the availability of information to us. So in this section what we are going to talk about is that how our emotions influence our thought through that behavior also. So two ways we can identify here. First one is this, by influencing the availability of information to us. What is that? Write down further. Write down, we often recall those information. We often recall those information from our long-term memory. We often recall those information from our long-term memory and notice those in our environment which are consistent with our present emotions, notice those in our external environment which are consistent with our present emotions, and ignore those which are inconsistent. And ignore those which are inconsistent. And ignore those which are inconsistent. Since we think in terms of these information only, so our emotions influence our thought. So our emotions influence our thought. So this is the first way that emotions and thought are found to be related. What I mean by this is something like this. Suppose for example, this is your conscious memory. Suppose this is your immediate mind, conscious mind, not memory. This is your, say, conscious mind. We will talk about that conscious mind, nature of that in the next topic, second point here. Suppose this is your long-term memory. Now, whenever we think, then we try to retrieve some information from our memory. Now, it is normally seen that when we are emotionally disturbed, emotionally aroused, then some information which are consistent with our current emotion, they come to our consciousness much more easily, and those which are inconsistent, well, they are simply blocked. We remember those things which is consistent and we ignore, block those things which are inconsistent. It is something like this. You must have seen. Let's take same example. Suppose you are very angry at your friend, and suppose you are shouting at your friend. And if you observe yourself, then your shouting may be something like this. You may tell your friend that you have done such a wrong thing to me today. That's why we are angry. So you tell your friend that you have done such a wrong thing to me today. Last week also you have done the same thing. 3 months ago you have done the same thing. 2 years ago you have done the same thing. You are just like that. Oh yes. Now, during this period, your friend might have done something good to you also. You don't remember that. That's why that person is your friend. But you don't remember the good things that he had done to you. You remember only bad things. So, all the wrong that he had done to you come to your memory, and all the right that he might have done to you during that period will be simply blocked. Any emotion. Suppose, for example, do you believe in ghost? If you believe in ghost, suppose, for example, it is in, just imagine a situation. Suppose it is in the middle of the night. You are all alone in your house. Suddenly there is a power cut, complete dark all the side, no blank, no nothing, no, you don't have the torch also, you don't have any candle, etc., emergency light, it's complete dark in middle of the night. Suddenly this word ghost comes to your mind. Do you realize that all the ghost stories that you might have read in your childhood also, maybe 10 years ago, which you don't remember earlier, suddenly it will come to your memory. So all the ghosts, the moment you think about ghost, then well, a certain type of emotion will be aroused in you, fear of ghost. That will bring all the ghost stories to your mind, and all the scientific information that was against the ghost stories will be blocked. You become more afraid. Any emotion. Suppose, for example, well, you must have seen, for example, when you are happy, then you remember more jokes. You don't remember jokes when you are angry. You remember jokes when you are happy. So, when we are angry, then we remember more the wrong that has happened to us. Afraid, more threatening thing. When we are sad, we remember more losses in our life. When we are happy, we remember more jokes. So, in a way, we can see that emotions create a type of filter to our mind, through which some emotions, some information are filtered in and some emotions are filtered out. That is one thing that emotions do to us. On the other hand, suppose, for example, this is the outside world outside us. Now, from outside world also, we notice those things which are consistent with our emotion, and we ignore and block those things which are inconsistent. So, we ignore those things. Just think of it. Such things happen in many families very often. Suppose, for example, in your family, suppose at one point of time, suppose your mother is very angry at the maid servant. She is shouting at the maid servant like a mad person. Suddenly, you can see that she finds you in front of. And suddenly, you find that one of your book is kept on the dining table. Now, she will start shouting at you that why is your book on this floor? Why don't you keep your books in your study room? Now, this book may be here for last 3 days. She will not notice that. But on that time when she is angry, well, she will notice everything wrong that you have done, like your book kept on dining table, which it should not be. So, when she will angry, she will notice wrong. When we were children, then we used to ensure that when father is angry, never go in front of him. Because, well, at that time, perhaps you will remember, you will notice even the marks that you have got in the last exam. That why don't you study? Your marks were so less. So, all this time everything was normal, but at that point of time, everything wrong that you have done will come into his notice. You must have seen when you go into the market, for example, suppose you are very hungry, then do you realize that number of restaurants in the market actually increases? We notice restaurant all this because hunger creates certain emotional state inside us that make us to notice restaurant more and ignore other shops. So, in this sense again you can see that all the emotion does the same. In anger, we notice the wrong thing around us. In happiness, we notice the good things around us. In sadness, we notice the missing things around us. In, you can say, fear, we notice threats around us. So, each emotion often, in surprise, we notice the new things around us. So, in each of these emotions, they often try to force us to notice certain type of information and, well, ignore some other types of information. In this sense, emotions create an external filter also. filter also to our mind. So both internal as well as internal filter. And thinking is what? Thinking is a manipulation of that information. So that is how we can say emotions influence our thought. That since we get biased, so in this sense you can say emotions create a bias into your thought. Since we get biased information, so thinking on the basis of that biased information will definitely be biased. That is how emotions influence our thought in this sense. In a way you can say, one way to understand this whole thing is something like this. Suppose for example, at one point of time you feel some emotion suddenly. The moment we feel an emotion, emotion will create a chain of events inside you. Chain of, you can say, well, some internal loop in a way. So first thing that emotion does, that it influences your memory. We notice those things consistent with your memory, and that noticing, remembering will make your emotion stronger. That will make you more noticing, more remembering wrong thing, and no. So this will become a loop type of thing. So when you are angry at your friend, well, you will remember more wrong that your friend has done. That will make you angrier still. That will make you remember more things. That will angrier still, more remembrance, angrier still, more. It will go on a cycle. Not only that, in emotions, well, we often can see change our perception of the outside reality. Outside reality, outside, let's call outside world. World outside also, and that also will make us angrier further. So your mother may be angry at the maid servant, that will make you to make her to notice your wrong, make her angrier further, more wrongs you will notice, and it will go on. Not only that, emotions often make us to act in a certain manner, which we have seen in the previous topic. And that action further feeds to that emotion. So when we are angry, then we shout. More you shout, angrier you become. More you shout, angrier you become. More you shout, and this go on. Any emotion. When you are happy, for example, then you start laughing. More you laugh, happier you become. More you laugh, happier you become. At one point, you start coughing maybe. So something bad may happen. You are sad, you cry. More you cry, sad you become. More cry, more sad. Sadness. More crying, more sadness. It will go on. So every time when we feel an emotion, it creates many such loops in our mind. And because of that, what may happen, that emotion may start with a small thing maybe. Emotion may start with a small thing maybe, but as the time has passed, well, it will become, so small thing is there and will keep on increasing. And at one point of time, you may suffer from the emotional hijack. You may suffer from the emotional hijack, and then after consequence may be sometimes very disastrous, as we have seen earlier. So think of that person that who killed his friend for the sake of 100 rupees. Well, this may be a small thing, 100 rupees, very small thing maybe. But what happened, the moment emotion happened, well, he start remembering everything that happened in the past maybe. That makes him further angry, it go on. He might have noticed something around him also that makes him, he starts shouting at his friend, that will further make him angrier. And all these things keep on feeding into that anger. And because anger always needs a feeding, anger needs a fuel, and these are the fuel that is given to anger. So anger creates, any emotion rather. So any emotion, well, creates internal feedback loop. That's why we often say emotions are always self-confirming. Emotions are self-confirming. When they happen in us, then they keep on finding out their own confirmation through the memory, through the world outside, through the actions that we perform. And through all the self-confirming actions and all, emotion becomes stronger and stronger on its own after a certain point of time. So it changes the whole world around us. You know, there is a beautiful quotation of John Paul Sartre. I hope you remember the name of John Paul Sartre. A few days ago, we have discussed his theory. Now, existential philosopher, he has written a lot about emotions. He had said that emotions are the magical transformation of the world. That's an interesting way to say about emotion. Emotions are the magical transformation of the world. When we are emotional, same world magically gets transformed into something else. So when you are happy, the world is very good. When we are sad, world is always with a gap. When we are angry, world is wrong. When we are afraid, world is threatening. So every emotion changes the way we look at the world. It is a magical transformation of the world. Emotions are like a glass that we wear on our mind. So just as you can see, when you wear the red glass on your mind, the whole world becomes red to you. Blue glass, same world becomes blue. Green glass, the same world becomes green. Emotions also changes the color of the world. Our perception of the world, our understanding of the world, it transforms that into something altogether different than what we perceive it to be. So that is the magical transformation. Now tell me one thing, out of these three loops, which is easiest to control and control? Of course, all of you can understand that, action. So action are easiest to control. That's why we often say that when we are emotional, first thing that you should do is to stop acting on that. When you are angry at your friend then or somebody, then first thing that you should do is to stop shouting, keep quiet for some time. That may possibly, well, at least one loop will be broken. That will somehow help you to control other things in a better manner. We'll talk about that in self-control class later on, but this is what we can do at one way. So this is how emotions change our thinking. When we are emotional, our thinking, our perception, our understanding, everything changes. Emotions are a type of, you can say, magical transformation of the world. So that is how emotions can be understood. Let me see if there is some question. Sir, is there a difference between stress and anxiety? Yes. Stress is basically, stress we'll talk about in later class, maybe a few days later, self-regulation class. Stress is basically a situation that is actually putting pressure on you to respond. So stress is more like fear. Anxiety is the anticipation of the stress. There is no stress right now, but you anticipate that you might feel stress, for example, then you feel anxiety. That is how the two can be different. Stress is more closer to fear. Anxiety is an anticipation, imagination of the fear in that case. So this is one way that emotions influence our thought, creates a bias into our thought. There is second way also in which emotions influence our thought. We'll talk about that second way after the break. So we'll take a break and then after we'll talk about the second way that emotions influence our